Welcome back. How do we define well-being in digital worlds and what it would mean to thrive? The next session is moderated by the Executive Director of the Joan Ganz Cooney Center at Sesame Workshop, Michael Preston, along with Scratch Foundation's Head of Product, Kevin Bedau, Senior Director of the Government and Public Affairs team at the Lego Group, Carolina Giuga, and Head of Social Impact at Riot Games, Jeffery Burrell. Together, they will offer insight into the challenges and opportunities that come with creating digital spaces that contribute to the thriving of both kids and adults.
Hi, everybody. How are you all feeling post-lunch? Good. Post-rain, sun. It's nice to see everybody here today. First of all, I just want to thank our hosts and congratulate the Games for Change team, alumni, community for this wonderful festival. I can't believe it's 20 years. It's just great to be together today. And thank the team for all they do for this community. So we're happy to be here. Most importantly, for all the work that we all do, we try to do together for social change. Like Arana said, I'm Michael Preston. I'm the Executive Director of the Joan Ganz Cooney Center. We're a research and innovation lab inside Sesame Workshop. I think of us as ambassadors of the child-centered design and innovation that Sesame has been pioneering for 50-something years now. And the way we apply that is by helping the creators of emerging media do what's best for kids. But today, the social change that we want to talk about is this idea of well-being. What well-being looks like in digital spaces, how we can make it to benefit kids, and really humans of all ages. Obviously at Sesame and the Cooney Center, we care about kids primarily, but we also care a lot about adults. We care about the families and caregivers, educators, and we also care about all of you in the room who make the digital experiences that kids love. So thank you for being here today. So I had a few things I wanted to kick us off with before we jump into this panel and introduce everybody. Well-being is obviously top of mind in the news on everybody's dinner table conversation. It's something that our Surgeon General speaks about in his recent advisory on youth mental health. It's also something that young people are sharing about every day on their social media platforms. And we're at a space now where there are a lot of unknowns still, and it's really actually an exciting time that as we learn, there's a call for more research so that we have the ability to come together around a shared research-based definition of well-being and work toward coming up with the design patterns that lead to those outcomes. How do we know we're successful, and how do we know we need to keep going? Yesterday, some of us had the lucky experience of being at the UN for the afternoon, having a conversation about the ways in which games and immersive media can advance the Sustainable Development Goals. And the same way the SDGs provide a common language around the kind of world we want to live in, the work we're trying to do here is really to try to frame how we want kids' experience to be and all people to be in the digital spaces we create. So in short, this is hardly a settled matter, which I hope everybody finds really exciting and motivating. I know I feel that way. I think all of my colleagues here feel that way too. That's why we're here today and what we hope to talk about and inspire you to all take up as well. We want to talk about well-being definitions. We want to talk about incorporating diverse perspectives so that we can serve and do well for a wide range of players. We want to balance responsible innovation with business practice and the pressures that go with it. And we want to empower designers. So if you're in the business of making things, whether you're a researcher, a designer, you're on a development team or some other kind of role, this is for you. All right, so enough of my talking. Let's switch gears. I want to do a very quick intro of this panel. I'm really excited to be here. These are friends, colleagues, people who I look up to every day in the work they do on to benefit lots and lots of people. So I'll just start to my right here, Carolina. Is your name still up there? Yeah, there you are. So Carolina is Senior Director of Government and Public Affairs. So I think of her superpower as creating a cross-sector activation of good ideas, that she has this public affairs and government background, but also gets businesses to think about positive goals and gets communities to do really interesting and good things. And so I think that's a unique contribution to the space that we need more of. Jeff, next to her. Jeff's official title is the Global Head of Social Impact for Riot Games, which is a big title. There's a lot of people who play the games that Riot makes. You've probably heard of League of Legends and Valorant. And what I think of Jeff's superpower is his ability to activate not only his colleagues across Riot, but also the massive global player base to do things that are powerful for their local communities and really contribute to a greater good. And then lastly, I have Kevin Bedau from Scratch. I think probably everybody, safely I could say in this room, has heard of Scratch. It is played, or there are 100 million registered users across this world who, for most of us, it was our first experience of learning how to code, but it's also a space of creative learning, self-expression, community that is also a great model. So needless to say, there's a really exciting group of folks here. Now I've really talked too much, and I want to now switch into question mode. Let's start off with just what is your personal relationship with this idea of well-being? Who wants to go first?
I'll take a stab. For me, what resonates most about well-being is this idea of balance. I think achieving a balance with demands and pressures of life, whether you're young or old, being able to meet the middle by having your passions, your interests fed and space to be able to pursue those well, having your basic needs met. So the notion of being able to pursue, which is elusive, but I think is important, this notion of balance as a human, I think is really central and personal to me is in terms of well-being.
Yeah, I can build on that a little bit. I think, personally, when I think of well-being, it's not necessarily to prepare the path for everybody, but to prepare them for the path ahead. It's because life is life, and it's both beautiful and hard. But at the same time, if someone is got a good tool set for well-being, to Kevin's point, they're able to have resilience in the hard times. They're able to really enjoy and find purpose in the good times. And making sure that what they're doing is like aligned to not only who they are, how they want to show up, and to build those connections. And through digital environments, it can be across boundaries, cultures, and languages.
And I'll share, very connected with what both of you mentioned and very personal to me. I think the first thing when you say the word well-being, there's two things that come up to mind, and both of them are related to my mother. So my mom's a math and a chemistry teacher. And one of the things growing up that I heard her on, and I don't know if anyone in the room has chemists as parents, but one of the things that I grew up hearing from her is that life is like a series of test tubes. And it is that balancing act. And you should have a little bit in each one of your test tubes. And if you feel that one test tube is like too little or overflowing, that's when it's out of balance. And I think that well-being is that exercise of balancing it out. But the other thing that I think that for me personally motivates me to be in the space and working is I remember my mom when she was, and she still teaches, but how much she's thinking about the child when she's preparing for a classroom. So how does she teach math in a way that is helping that child thrive? And she's not going to teach, algebra, just a simple class. She's thinking of how to make it engaging, how to make it social, how to make it fun. And I saw firsthand her teaching these classes, and you just seeing kids that are coming in with maybe a hatred for math. I cannot do math, and suddenly thriving in that space. And I think that there is a connection with, jumping back to the Lego group and what we're doing in this space on when you're thinking about putting the child in the center and thinking about all these, let's say, different test tubes. I think that's the well-being. It's holistic. It's a balancing act between all these different elements.
It's funny when you were mentioning chemistry as the context for your personal relationship with well-being, I was thinking about explosions. I don't know why. Test tubes and smoke, but it was actually a much more nuanced thing. I'm not surprised. But what I heard in all three of you was this idea of balance, that well-being is not a state of continuous positivity, that is actually more about centering a person or a child and ensuring that they have a range of tools that they can use in lots of different contexts. Kevin, I also totally neglected to mention your superpower. I gave the other two superpowers. Yours, I think, is this kind of moment that you're in now where you're really taking a good hard look at this beloved, world-known platform and are tuning it in this way. Like I've been really inspired by what you've shared already, and I'm excited for you to share with this group. So thank you. Anyway, sorry about that, guys. All right, so my next question, Jeff, I want to direct this one at you.
Sure.
So in your role, and maybe you could share a little bit about how you operate, but in Riot Games and in the world, there are so many things you could be focusing on. You're a very small team, as I understand it. Why well-being and why digital thriving? This concept that we've been working on together. What about thriving in games is compelling, and why are you focusing on that?
Yeah, and as you said, we live in a world with unlimited need, but limited resources. And how I kind of look at it is, if we can actually focus on the design upstream, meaning so much of how we're supposed to change and fix the world is down to the onus of the person. You know, we ourselves need to recycle. We ourselves need to do X, Y, and Z. But if we can actually move some of that responsibility upstream, then I think that would have such an outsized impact, not only to the 3 billion people who play games, but to the 90% of young people who are in digital spaces as well. And so I think that's not only, just in terms of like a moral imperative, but then it makes a lot of business sense as well. If we're able to make places where everybody feels like they've got a voice, they've got a space for them, they can engage with their friends and make new friends in a safe and healthy way, that'll encourage them to continue to play games and to be multi-generational, to invite their parents, to invite their cousins. And I think that is something that if we can just sort of help in our own small way, accelerate this type of learning and this type of adaptation, then that's something that we would absolutely love to focus on for the benefit of our players.
Are you seeing any kind of early signs that this is like the right direction, or like what are the signals you're looking for as you proceed?
Yeah, it's hard to kind of get your head around the removal of bad in video games and specifically focus on the development of good. But once you start having like a coffee chat with people about it, then you get to lean in. And they're like, wait, tell me a little bit more about that. And so when we start to have some of these initial conversations with some of our fantastic colleagues and friends, then we start to understand that this is a particular need and it's a problem that has to be solved. And if we can do it in a very collaborative way, if we can focus on bringing the whole industry together as opposed to just, one flag in the ground, this is how we do it, then I think that's actually going to move all of us towards a higher ground. And so I think that's sort of the signals that I get, is just like the excitement when I talk about these ideas with others, because then all of a sudden it's 2 hours later and I'm late for a meeting, but it's totally worth it.
That's awesome. Wouldn't it be great if there were a project that brought lots of designers together?
That would go on. Yeah.
Anyway, let's come back to that. Okay, so Kevin, another one for you. We talked about you're now shaping these products that are deployed everywhere, kids, grown-ups using them for all kinds of creative and cool things. I know from my years of following Scratch how strong a culture there is there. There's like Mitch's vision for this creative, what he says, low floors, wide walls, and high ceilings, right? This idea that Scratch is for everyone, no matter what place they come from, endless possibility. How within that context do you go from an idea like, oh, we're really interested in making a well-being move within this environment? How does that turn into some kind of reality for you?
Yeah, for Scratch, we've had the advantage of always reflecting on elements of our culture and approach to design that align very well with the concept of well-being. This notion that young people's creative expression and learning pathways are reinforced by having peer connections, by being able to pursue projects that are reflections of their own passion, are really intrinsic to how we've approached design of Scratch products and programs since its inceptions. So leaning in on this notion that well-being is part and parcel how we continue to extract the best out of young people who engage on Scratch is really something that is a continuation of a foundation of elements that we've implemented in our design. I think the opportunity for us is to better codify with the best-in-class research how and where that manifests in interactions with our digital programs, and really lean in on how we can refine and approach new innovations on Scratch from a perspective that continues to reinforce in ways that's research aligned and really can help us codify and manifest those for our education institutions, the folks who are interested in understanding the ways in which learning pathways are being unlocked for young people in Scratch.
Yeah, and your mention of learning pathways reminds me of this big educator community around Scratch that is local in many places and face-to-face, as well as the sort of broad global community. I'll ask the same question of you, though. Like, are there some signals that you're kind of looking for as this work emerges? Like, what are some things you're interested in seeing as you implement?
Yeah, I think rubrics and approaches for intentional design is a way, again, to codify not just how you approach innovation and developing new products and features, but also ways to evaluate where and how what you're building is contributing to the indicators. We have a great sense, given the emergence of the RITEC framework and some other related frameworks, of how some of the softer skills that you're developing while interacting with Scratch manifest themselves, but being able to really, with intention, codify them, expose them to our learners and our educator communities, and be able to, with some sense of rigor, test and learn and understand the ways in which a feature that's designed with a particular intention is actually manifesting in the real world.
Amazing. Okay, great. Well, we'll come back to these questions of how we know we're successful. I think that's a really good topic to probe more. Carolina, it's your turn. So Kevin mentioned RITEC. Responsible innovation and technology for children, I believe, are the words. LEGO has really leaned into this idea of that you can design for kids' well-being broadly. You can design for children's rights. You can design for children's well-being. It can be in real-world physical spaces, but it can also be in digital spaces. And I think LEGO, more than most companies, has really embraced that idea and put your money where your mouth is, which is to design in that way. I was wondering if you could share with us more about what that looks like, what it means for LEGO to design for well-being in digital spaces, and then maybe as an extension, where that would go outside of LEGO even.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you don't mind, I think it's important, especially because in this room, hopefully you have played with Lego bricks before, but hopefully if you haven't already, learn a little bit more about where we are in terms of our digital portfolio and just understanding of our digital transformation journey. So I think the point that the time where I think it really, it's really important to start telling that story and that journey was when we started working very closely with UNICEF back in 2015. And in that partnership, our intention was, how do we as a company embed children's rights and well-being into our business practices? So this can go from, something very different than the gaming and the digital world that we're talking about. If you're building a factory, like what should be indicators and factors that we take into consideration while making that decision, but all the way to our digital solutions, platforms, and games and applications. And that, I think, was a very important moment for the LEGO Group. We, as a company, we say that children are, our role models, and by that we want to put the child front and center of the design. So within that, partnership with UNICEF, we were the first toy company to sign off on these and embed children's rights and well-being into our products. But fast forward to just a couple of years ago, we launched RITEC in partnership with RITEC, in partnership with UNICEF, and the intention there was, can we, and especially just background, I come from the policy world, and if anyone here is in this regulatory or policy space, the focus of the discussion is on safety, which should be. But again, going back to where we started, it's not only the safety side. We're missing an important part in the political debate, which is this well-being. So the intention behind bringing together academic partners, corporations, organizations together in this project is, are we able to create a framework to help designers also think about these issues, also think about well-being when they're designing the products? And even, it's not only we're not doing this for the Lego group, we're doing this, can we create a framework that can then be used by others? And that's why we're bringing in others to the table to have that discussion.
So in your mind, it's not unique to Lego to be able to operate this way.
It shouldn't, yeah. It shouldn't.
And do Lego, I wonder, like at the level of factories, are some of those lessons transferable in your mind as well?
Yeah, I think so. I think it is a big word, and sometimes it can be difficult to, okay, so what exactly does this mean? But once you get into, the specifics, it's very clear. So let me just mention an example, maybe not on the factory, because I don't think this is the audience, but from a digital perspective. So we have a social app called Lego Life. And it's a great platform with a much younger audience where kids are sharing their Lego creations. One of the things that we realized from a safety perspective is that any content that was being uploaded should be, this is user-generated content, should be moderated, every single content. So this is a friction point to the experience for the kid. What we then were asking our design teams is, what do we do during this friction point? And what the design team was able to create is, can we then create, and that's what we ended up doing, is creating a non-player character. His name is Captain Safety. And what Captain Safety does during this period where the child is waiting for that content to be pre-approved is talk about, safety and well-being messages, tips. And remember, this is a younger audience. So, talking about cyberbullying, talking about, mental health. But we created that moment, and I think that hopefully it's a good example of how you balance those two things out, and what are the conversations then back to the design team in terms of, what can we incorporate into that experience?
Captain Safety's not here in the room today, right?
I don't think so. I don't see him.
Maybe
raise your hand.
might be outside. It's inspiring to think, though, that those kind of design practices can be codified, externalized. You were talking about that as well, Kevin. I was thinking, though, one thing that I find really interesting in designing for kids is that you can't just paint kids with a broad brush, right? Kids grow, there's a developmental pathway that's not necessarily even connected directly to age, and so what's appropriate for them, or how do you meet their needs and match their interests all along the way is something that Lego has always been really good at as well. I assume that's part of the approach.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And when we talk about child-centric, is not bringing in kids to test out your product. I think that's an important distinction, is bringing them to co-design with you. So one of the questions that our internal team likes to ask the kids when we bring them on board for certain parts is, if you were in control, what would you change? And it's mind-blowing the type of answers that we have and how that has impacted the direction that we're going with the project. One, again, and I think I just have Lego Life in my brain right now, but I have another example which I love about just bringing kids, is that when when we're going back to well-being, one thing that's important for kids is that social element, is that connection. But how do you do it, again, in a safe environment, younger kids? And we realized that they could still communicate and connect, but through emojis. What we did then was bring the kids to define what should be in that keyboard of predetermined emojis so they can communicate. And anyone here with preteens knows that they can communicate very well with just emojis. They do not need letters. But that's just an example of how do you bring them to co-design with you, part of the experience.
It's a great example. And you mentioned one thing I wanted to come back to about how the focus in the policy space is largely about safety. And the way I've heard folks talk about this in the work we're doing is that safety, security, privacy are necessary conditions, but not sufficient in the sense of the broader hopes of what we want for kids, which are more aspirational. And that's where I think the connection between the rights and well-being worlds kind of come together in the Venn diagram of those things. Mm-hmm. We have some fun co-design experiences of our own, and recently have been doing some social media messaging work with a company called Mrs. Wordsmith. And the kids, it's a playful messaging app, basically, where you can flag bad things and elevate good things. And they're very sophisticated. 8, 9, 10-year-old kids have notions of what is right and wrong, how to communicate it to each other, when to bring in a trusted adult, bring your grown-up, that kind of thing that I think is really interesting. And so there's so much to learn from kids, especially as they go through those stages. It's really exciting. I'll ask you guys too, we're talking about kids a bunch here. Obviously, folks in this room are interested in a broad range of ages. Why should we care about designing for kids in a room of designing for everybody? Anybody want to take a stab at that?
I could take a start.
I'd love to hear.
Yeah. So if you think about it, all generations go through a major technological shift. So my parents didn't have a TV until very late. Growing up in Missoula, Montana, I didn't get a cell phone until after college. And so what we're seeing right now is that kids, especially those that are being born today, are just going to be digital natives. And so understanding exactly what it is that we can do, how can we create safe on-ramps and essentially bumpers of a bowling lane to get them used to positive online behaviors, to get them used to modeling exactly kind of what they want to be and how they want to show up, will be just absolutely paramount for how they'll live the rest of their lives with these digital environments that we're all taking for granted now. But so if we start with the child in mind, then that will actually have so many spillover effects into everything else that we're designing even further downstream.
Yeah, I think of the old adage that it's easier to build strong children than it is to repair broken men. And I really see opportunities to work in youth empowerment and education technology as an opportunity to address economic divide, social divide, centering young people and empowering them with tools, not only to enhance their learning experiences, but to empower them with tools to be able to shape the future, is something that I feel compelled to, from a personal and professional standpoint, and think centering young people makes sense in that regard. And I wanted to go back to something that Carolina mentioned about centering children as part of the expression of well-being or evolution of well-being with respect to digital products and experiences. I'm wondering in what ways, because Scratch certainly looks at co-design as being central importance in how we approach developing our products. I'm wondering in your travels, what kinds of reflections on well-being you're seeing in the early going around well-being on behalf of young people. We often talk about well-being on behalf of our children, but I often don't ask, well, what makes you feel empowered, son? Or, how is it that you are thinking about your own well-being, and what would you like to see more of in your experiences, both at school or at home? So I'm curious to learn in your travels what kinds of reflections you're getting and engaging in that level of discussion.
No, absolutely. So let me start, just to address your question. These are future users, future citizens. I think that, starting with kids, one thing that inspired the Lego journey is that the fact that the internet was not created with them in mind at all. And we suddenly have an opportunity of designing with kids in mind. And I think that's so important. But to address your point on just hearing their voices, that's why when we were co-creating, the RITEC initiative, the first phase of that project was just listening, and we had workshops all across the globe. What's interesting to hear is that well-being is not that different for a kid growing up in Brazil versus in Korea. There are so many similarities. And that first part of the report is so interesting because it is very focused on the input that we got, from younger kids through, workshops, through just this immense data set that UNICEF has. So it was really interesting, and intentionally, that's where we wanted to start. And now obviously we have, a framework that we're gonna start testing it out, but it was very important to start at that point.
I have a funny Scratch story. In a co-design session we had with kids with an AI startup, the kids really didn't like the way the bot was talking to them. They didn't like its manners or lack thereof, or the kind of tone, and they had opinions. And one girl went and grabbed a laptop and said, "I'm gonna show you," and got Scratch, loaded Scratch on this computer and put some words in, that kind of parroted what the AI tool was doing, and said, this is how I wanted to talk, and like made a little, routine in Scratch that was like sweet, and said what you wanted to say. I just thought that was amazing. I mean, this is obviously a kid who had a lot of support enabling her to decide that Scratch was the tool and that she could do it. But that just made my day. And it's 6 months later, I'm telling you the story. It's obviously still kind of present for me.
Absolutely.
So we talked about centering young people in design, kids. What about designers? What can we do to center designers? I think how many people in this room wear a design hat in some shape or form?
Oh, nice.
Oh, wow. Okay, good. Like maybe more than half. What are your thoughts on what can we do? We can ask them that question too, actually. Should we ask them now or should we wait? What?
You're the moderator.
I'm the moderator?
You're the boss
Oh,
here.
you're making
That's a lot of power.
I was being democratic about this. Why don't we start with you, Aldo? Like, what are your thoughts on the ways, Kevin, I know that you're leading designers, but each of you interacts with folks who make things for kids. Like, what do you think the tools are?
Yeah, again, go back to my earlier statements about having rubrics for design, really distilling for folks what the intention of an interaction or a learning motif might be down to the outcome level, or reflecting on those outcomes and how we're looking to make designs, and having some sort of visual reference for designers, not as a kind of a strict way to explicitly enforce how we're designing, but as a guidepost. I think would be really interesting to offer designers the agency to be creative in how they're designing, while having some sort of reference point to be able to reflect on it and say, is this particular feature or experience contributing to said outcome in these ways? And what kinds of tools would be available for me in an early prototyping session to be able to inspect and understand the ways in which that may be manifesting or not? How does a designer know whether we're on the right track when building a user experience or not? Oftentimes that comes from experience. It comes from a sense of kind of a functional or usability notion of how to interact with a particular motif. But when you're looking at something that's more subtle, like the outcomes that relate to well-being, having a guidepost to understand, how do the interactions in concert contribute to these particular outcomes, I think would be really helpful. And then having access to communities of practice that you can refer to when making design choices that you can subscribe to, you can call up, you can join a Slack channel. I think having particularly when something is fledgling as what we're looking to build here, having access to communities of practice where you're designing with this intention, I think is the other element that would be really powerful to empower designers.
Thank you. There's a lot of amazing free resources out there now. I don't know if folks have seen Child Rights by Design, which was published out of the Digital Futures Commission a month or two ago. Just lots of really interesting takes that try to combine all the things we're talking about here, but offer up, I guess, a series of prompts or propositions for designers to consider and pick and choose where they most want to address something. But anyway, on to you, Jeff or Carolina. What any thoughts about like what we could be doing better for designers?
Yeah, I can kind of jump in a little bit. I agree with pretty much everything Kevin said.
All right.
No, but I would say like the analogy that I use, especially for video game design, and looking at that, is that there's no shortage of ways of like how to think about things and sort of various examples out there. But what I think would be extremely helpful would be either some kind of community-driven or centralized, kind of collection where people could highlight some of the best practices that are out there, these guideposts, and then being able to like point to those specific outcomes. Like it's the idea of sociology and human psychology are nothing new, but for the digital age, it needs to be adapted. And so if we could start to highlight some of those to build this community of practice, like you say, then I think that is something that could actually have tremendous outside impact, because ultimately we're not going to need to convince the designers. I think most designers here already know that, oh, we need to do this. It would be convincing those around the industry why it's a good thing, why it's a business imperative, and how do we start to unlock more resources, headcount, et cetera, to be able to get there together.
Thank you. Yeah, and I actually would love everybody to weigh in on like what's the business imperative? How do you articulate that to yourselves? It's an internal question too. Maybe help others make it for their own organizations. But we can come back to that. Carolina, what were you going to say?
I was gonna add, not that different from what Kevin was saying, but I think, and I know that you've heard me say this already before, but when someone like myself or one of my team members is part of the design process for a new product, up to this point, I feel that we're the naysayers. We're telling them from a privacy, safety, security, you can't do this, you can't do that, you can't do this. What we're trying to build internally is how do we do on the well-being side, are there similar things that we can, like a similar checklist where for positive outcomes, so not for, for safety. These obviously we need to do, there's no question about it. Remember, we're a physical toy company at the first and foremost, so we know, safety regulation and we've embedded pretty clearly. But it's how do we then go to our designers with a list of like, yes, do these things. I don't want to be the naysayer. So I think, it's something that's always in the back of our mind when we're looking at, be it RITEC or other projects on how do we get that framework of no's and yeses.
Yeah, inputs for reinforcement and less so constraints, because we're bound by similar kinds of approaches as well, and looking to enforce safety in our online community. If you're familiar with the Scratch product, there's a heavy social component in how young people are interacting, sharing projects, commenting, the like. And, adoptions by schools, institutions are really interested in understanding the ways in which we're moderating. We're offering safe guidelines for participation in community. And oftentimes the approach to design becomes more of a constraint and a conversation around constraints than it does something that's empowering. So I think framing access to resources, access to community of practice, whatever rubrics or guideposts are out there in ways that are reinforcing and empowering for designers is a great way to approach this movement.
I'd be remiss if I didn't really mention some of the ideas that we talk about when we talk about well-being, and some of them are very zoomed out. If in the RITEC framework, you see things like competence and self-efficacy, or in broader psychological terms, you see like belonging as one of these things that people are aiming for when they're designing digital spaces. But then we have our colleagues here from the Fair Play Alliance who are working on a framework that calls out really specific kinds of interactions that one might have in online games, like one of my favorites is onboarding a new team member to your team. I think of a lot of them actually as like what it's like to be a second grade teacher, like the new kid shows up and what do you want to do to support them? Or how to handle someone who's disruptive on your team. That there are these things that are not just kind of high ideals, aspirational, broad stroke kind of ideas, but also very discrete and something that you could be actioning and looking for in the metrics of your own game. And I think that actually I find it really interesting and motivating that there's that wide range of approaches, that we're still kind of coming up with definitions of what we want for kids. It's based in the RITEC case, based on interviews with thousands of children, as well as reanalysis of existing global data sets. But then you also have the Digital Thriving work with Fair Play Alliance that's more about like what game designers who are researchers as well as designers really are thinking about in the daily experience of what they see happening on the platform. So there's such a gamut here. I just felt like I had to say that it's not like there's a path here that is one size fits all. I think it's people have to decide for themselves. We said we were going to leave a couple minutes for questions. Is there anybody, did you have anything else you wanted to say before I switch gears? Any words of wisdom you want to offer? That's a high bar, isn't it?
It is a high bar.
I can't follow it.
Nope.
Do you want to say something wise before we ask them a question? No.
I would just want to ask for help.
Yeah.
Honestly, we're all treading new ground here. Like we all can agree that it's a pretty serious issue. The good news is that there's no lack of urgency on all of us. And so please, any of the frameworks or any of the things that you heard that piques your interest, reach out, connect. There's some great information online, and we could just use all the help we can get on wherever and however you could.
I just switched to this slide. That's a very large QR code. If you want to follow up with us, all of us are connected here, so one QR for all. But I think it may be a good time for us to ask you all what's coming up for you, what questions you have, thoughts, requests. I'll repeat. There's no mics to pass, so just you first.
So I have a question for you, Carolina, about your children-centric design practices.
Mm-hmm.
So you obviously mentioned that when you make a toy, the toy has to be safe and all of that. And I'm wondering what you do to make sure that the design practice is also safe and ethical and in compliance with any regulation, and also how you compensate children for the work that they're doing.
So let's tackle one question at a time. So in terms, I think that what's important is it's a combination of teams. I think what has been really a game changer for us is to have a team that is dedicated on child safety. And we've had these members of this team embedded into, be it the gaming division, be it other areas of the company. So to ensure it's not only from a legal compliance, but also going into frameworks like the UNICEF framework that I mentioned. Into compensation for kids, then that's a whole set of different conversation, but I'd love to connect with you afterwards to share a little bit more. So hopefully that answered the first part of your question. Okay, good. A start is good.
All right. We have so many hands up. Let's just keep going. Yes, white jacket.
I'm curious, for all three of you, how pillars of scaffolded social emotional learning have gone into thinking about RITEC and the children's experience. Is that a conversation that happens on your teams? Do people learning about that, specialists, that kind of thing?
Yeah, I can start it off. And so social emotional learning is something that is very embedded into how we're thinking about our experiences, how we're thinking about our products. This is part of a bigger framework for the LEGO group that we call it learning through play. And we try to include that rationale into the experience. We're firm believers on the importance of playing and the benefits that you have, and that that's how we include it as part of the equation. And there is a portion on the RITEC report, the first one that came out on social emotional learning.
We're just going to keep going.
Keep on
going. Yes, Michael.
Hi. What are you seeing promising around family engagement, mental engagement?
I love that you asked that question because that was my burning part to
Oh, no,
add. So I'm
burning. I'm sorry.
No, it wasn't, because I was like, I want to hear from the audience. And I'm so glad you asked that because, I've been talking a lot about the children, the user, but the reality is that for us, the parent's voice and the caregiver's voice is also super important. And it's so interesting for us to open those channels and hear what's top of mind and what's concerning to them. And how do you, one of the things that we learned a few years ago was that one of the biggest challenges that parents and caregivers were having is that, and I'm as a parent, I know talking about stranger danger to my kids or talking about like the importance of, safety when you're crossing a street, but that parents and caregivers don't feel the same way about some of the digital topics that we're talking about. So we felt that it was a responsibility, especially since our users are at a much younger age group, on creating content to help parents and caregivers have these conversations with their kids, but also in a gamified way, teaching some of these things like bullying, or if you see something that's wrong on the platform, how do you report it? And just like safety tips. And so it has been a really interesting dialogue with just hearing what's top of mind for parents and caregivers.
Yeah, for Scratch, we've traditionally centered our young people and learners as well as educators in terms of the personas that we involve in the co-design process. Parents to a lesser degree. For us, I think exploring new innovations and features aligning to this concept of well-being I think presents a really great opportunity for us to engage parents. I'm a parent myself, and oftentimes think about my children's own well-being with respect to their engagement on digital platforms. And I think the promising elements there is that we're really looking to elevate that persona as part of our co-design process.
And just me from a perspective, we don't make games for anyone under 13. But I do see an acceleration of these tools because now games, like I said, are multi-generational. You have parents who grew up playing games now wanting to share that love and joy with their children. And because of that, now they're actively seeking out additional tools and resources to how best to share and to bring them online in these safe and healthy environments. And so from my perspective, all I see is just more demand and acceleration for these that are going out there, which is really great to see.
In the next phase of research on RITEC, the NYU team had some really cool findings about gamer parents with their kids. So that's a little teaser for the future, yeah. All right, we're down to our last 30 seconds. I'm sorry, we're not gonna get to more questions. Maybe we can all meet you outside. That was what I was gonna do. It's on the bottom of the
25
slide, just above my head, or their heads. This idea of design, we take it seriously. Come tomorrow at 5. There will be a lot of Legos for you to play with, and we're gonna talk with designers, not just us, in the room about what all this means and get your thoughts and feedback as well. So please join us tomorrow at 5 across the street at Microsoft.
And I love the excitement this front row of playing. So come play with us tomorrow.
Yeah, thank you all for being here. And thank you, panelists.
Thank you,
Really
Michael.
enjoy
Thank you, Michael.
you as people and brilliant minds. Thank you.
Thank you.